I'm Samantha Hart, 34, sitting at the defense table in my own courtroom, my thumb tracing the red wolf scarf in my lap. Across the aisle, Kevin and Karen were laughing with their lawyer, already imagining the $5.5 million they expected to take. They didn't recognize me. Then the bailiff called the court to rise. My parents stood for a stranger, but I stood with them. I walked past the bar, climbed the steps, and took the bench. Their lawyer's smirk vanished. I turned to the gallery. Today you're the jury. If your parents treated you like luggage to profit from, would you let them back in? Or would you destroy them? Drop guilty or innocent in the comments now. I'll tell you what they did in a moment. It was 1994, and O'Hare Terminal 3 felt like the loudest place on earth. Announcements, conveyor belts, people rushing. I did not belong to that motion. I felt like a stone stuck in a river. I was 5, wearing a red wool scarf that scratched my neck and dragged on the linoleum, but I refused to take it off because it kept the draft out. Kevin and Karen walked ahead, not holding my hand, checking their watches with tight movements. They looked annoyed, like people late for a meeting, not like parents who'd lost a child. Karen glanced back and snapped, "Keep up, Samantha. You're slowing us down." They led me past ticket counters and reunion gates to oversized baggage. A cavern of golf clubs, car seats, and cardboard boxes, smelling of jet fuel and coffee. "Wait here," Kevin said, pointing to a metal bench. "Watch the bags. We have to go get tickets. Don't move until we come back." I asked, "How long?" in a small voice. "Count the bags," Karen replied without looking at me. "Count 500 bags. By the time you finish, we'll be here." I sat, pulled the scarf over my nose, and counted. 2, 3, a set of skis, a guitar case, a box. I reached 50, 100. The crowd thinned. The belt's hum became rhythmic. 200, 300. By 500, the carousel stopped. People had left with their things. The lights seemed dim. The place had the low hum of loneliness. Gripping my scarf, I realized something a 5-year-old shouldn't have to. They weren't late or lost. Their faces when they walked away weren't panic. They were relief. They'd left me at baggage claim because, to them, I was baggage. Heavy, unwanted, something to be checked and forgotten. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was crushing, stealing my voice. For years after, I barely spoke. I let life happen because I was too afraid to make a sound. It took decades to learn silence could be a weapon, not only a wound. Now, when the courtroom quiets for my ruling, I control the silence to command respect. Then, while I sat frozen, a Segway security guard rolled by, did a double take, and circled back. A man in a gray suit had been watching from a pillar. He didn't look like a hero, more like an accountant, tall with kind eyes and wire-rimmed glasses. The guard reached for his radio. "I'm calling social services," he said. The man intervened. "She's with me." He knelt, ignored the grime, and looked at me directly without touching me. "My name is William," he said. "I saw them leave. I'm sorry." He didn't promise they'd return. He spoke the truth, and that honesty saved me from the lie I might have accepted. He stayed until the police came, through foster placements, and then stayed for good. He was the safety net when my family let me fall. William died quietly on a Tuesday morning, just as he had lived. No headlines. A small service attended by shelter staff he had quietly supported. I sat in the front row wearing the red scarf, feeling the hush settle again. At the will reading, I expected modest savings. Instead, the lawyer handed a thick portfolio. William wasn't merely a retired accountant. He had been an angel investor who quietly backed several major tech companies in the 90s. He'd lived simply to give generously. The estate totaled $500,000, $100,000 for each year of his 55-year life. 2 days later, the news ran, "Local judge inherits secret fortune." 48 hours after that, the phone didn't ring. A process server came to my door with a lawsuit. Fraudulent custody and estate theft, filed by Kevin and Karen Hart. They didn't call to check on me. They sued. They alleged William had kidnapped me at the airport 30 years earlier and claimed they'd spent decades searching, victims of some elaborate abduction. They demanded the full $5.5 million and the deed to William's house. I read the complaint in my living room. It was a work of fiction describing their endless agony and a hole in their hearts. I did not cry or panic. I entered chambers mode and read it like a judge scanning a case file. That's when I recognized the ledger of narcissism. Where normal parents see a child as a person, Kevin and Karen saw me as an asset. At 5, I had been a liability, a mouth to feed and a burden to unload at baggage claim. 30 years later, my value had changed. I was now a receivable. They weren't back because they missed me. They were back because my investment had matured and they wanted to cash out. It wasn't love, it was accounting. Their greed burned away the last of the frightened little girl in me. They thought they were suing a victim. They were actually suing the law. I set the papers down without immediately calling counsel. I walked to the mirror and looked at the child who counted to 500 and the woman who had jailed criminals for less than this. Motion denied, I whispered to the empty room. Then I picked up the phone and called the state's top forensic accountant. I need you to dig. Go back to 1994. I needed everything. If they wanted a fight, I would give them a full legal battle, and I would make sure the price of this lawsuit cost them whatever they had left. I didn't respond to the claim. I didn't call Kevin or Karen to argue or demand answers. That's what a daughter might do. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a plaintiff preparing a case against 2 defendants who had miscalculated badly. I switched into professional mode. In my job, decisions aren't based on emotion, but on evidence. I called Sarah Jenkins, the toughest forensic accountant in Chicago, and gave her one instruction: go back to 1994. Find out where their money came from, because people with a history of manipulation rarely change. If they were willing to come after me now, then they had likely tried to profit back then. People don't abandon a child without trying to turn the loss into something beneficial. For 3 days, my dining table became a workroom. We reviewed tax filings, property records, and old court archives that still smelled of dust. The past isn't buried, it's preserved on microfiche. Sarah found the inconsistency on a Tuesday night. Sam, she said, voice steady, look at 1995. I leaned over her shoulder at the digitized Cook County filings. There it was, a civil suit. Kevin and Karen Hart versus American Continental Airlines. They hadn't simply walked away, they had sued the airline. I pulled the full case file. My hands stayed steady as I turned each page. Their complaint claimed that on November 6, 1994, they had entrusted their daughter to an airline agent for an unaccompanied minor flight to visit a sick relative, and that the airline failed to watch me, allowing me to disappear. There was no ticket, no sick relative. They had walked me to oversized baggage and left me there. But in 1995, without today's constant recording and tracking, they could shape any story they wanted. The complaint described emotional distress and loss. They portrayed themselves as devastated parents whose child vanished due to negligence. Then I saw the settlement. The airline, avoiding bad publicity about a missing child, settled out of court. The payment was $450,000 in 1995, a significant amount, enough for a house, cars, and a long stretch of comfort. The check wasn't the key evidence. The key was the signed affidavit. To receive the settlement, Kevin and Karen had to sign a sworn statement. Reading it made the room feel still. We, the parents, acknowledge that the minor child, Samantha Hart, is presumed deceased. We accept this settlement as full and final compensation for the wrongful death of our child. Their signatures were clear. They had legally declared me dead. They agreed I no longer existed in exchange for money. They didn't lose me. They cashed me out. I sat back. The anger didn't flare. It solidified. They had sold my life for $450,000, spent it, and returned now to profit again. They assumed I was a ghost who couldn't respond. I picked up the phone and called my attorney. I have it, I said. Do not settle. We're going to trial. I looked at their signatures one last time. They had signed away my existence. Now I would sign the paperwork that ended their claims. The trial drew attention, and Kevin and Karen were the main focus. They testified wearing neutral clothing, their expressions arranged to convey grief. Karen cried on cue, describing lasting emotional pain and the devastation of uncertainty. They portrayed themselves as victims of a wealthy man who had supposedly taken their child. Had I not lived the truth, their story might have been convincing. They didn't look cruel. They looked harmed. They looked like parents who had left a place at the table for someone missing. I watched calmly from the defense table, not interrupting or objecting. I let them build their narrative carefully. The higher the structure, the more forceful the collapse. When it was our turn, we didn't call character witnesses or specialists. We called one name. The defense calls Megan Hart. The room shifted. Kevin turned sharply. Karen gasped. They hadn't expected this. They thought Megan, the daughter they raised, would support their story. Megan walked to the stand. She was 28, a social worker with tired eyes and a reserved posture. She didn't look at our parents. She looked directly at me. We shared features, but our paths had shaped us differently. I grew firm. She grew burdened. She swore the oath and began. My attorney asked what growing up in the Hart household was like. Megan took a steady breath. It felt like living in a mausoleum, she said. I wasn't just their daughter. I was the substitute. I grew up in the shadow of the lost child. But it wasn't about missing Samantha. It was about using her. She explained the ghost sibling pattern. I had thought Megan was the fortunate one, the one who got a home. But listening to her, I realized she had not escaped anything. I had been removed. She had been living inside the narrative for nearly 3 decades. They used the story, Megan continued. Whenever money was tight or a gambling loss happened, they brought up the tragedy. The church helped. Neighbors supported them. Samantha wasn't a person to them. She was currency. Karen stood abruptly, face tense. Megan, stop. Don't do this. Sit down, the bailiff ordered. Megan remained composed. She reached into her bag and pulled out a shoebox. It smelled of attic storage. They told everyone they spent everything searching for her, Megan said. They said they hired investigators. But last week, while cleaning the attic, I found this. She opened the box. It wasn't filled with search materials. It wasn't correspondence with detectives. It was casino receipts from the Empress Riverboat Casino in Joliet. She held up several faded slips. These are dated November 7th, 8th, and 9th, 1994, the week Samantha disappeared. While police were searching for her at the airport, Kevin and Karen were gambling. They weren't looking. They were celebrating. The courtroom fell silent. The silence felt the same as it had in the baggage claim years ago, but this time it wasn't weighing on me. It was weighing on them. Megan looked at our parents, finally breaking into tears. I used to feel guilty that I stayed, she said quietly, but now I understand Samantha was the one who got out. I was the one left behind. Kevin sank back, a man realizing his entire narrative had collapsed. They hadn't just abandoned one daughter, they had harmed the other. My attorney didn't pause. Megan's testimony had opened the structure, but we still needed to bring the rest down. He approached the bench and placed a single yellow document before the judge. It was a certified copy of the 1995 settlement from the Cook County Archives. Your Honor, he said, steady and clear, the plaintiffs are claiming parental rights to seek control of an estate. Yet this sworn affidavit, signed December 12, 1995, shows that Kevin and Karen Hart legally declared their daughter, Samantha Hart, deceased. Kevin went pale. Karen gripped his arm tightly. They recognized the document immediately. It was the record of what they had taken in exchange for my life. The judge reviewed it, her expression shifting. She looked at them with an unmistakable mix of disappointment and disdain. Mr. and Mrs. Hart, she said firmly, you accepted $450,000 from American Continental Airlines for the wrongful death of your child. You signed a sworn statement confirming she was gone. Therefore, one of two things is true. Either you committed fraud and theft in 1995, or you are committing perjury and fraud in this courtroom today. Which is it? The trap was complete. If they admitted I was alive in 1995, they had stolen nearly $500,000. If they insisted I was dead, they had no standing to bring this lawsuit. Their attorney, realizing the situation, stepped away and began packing his materials. I rose without waiting for approval. I walked to the center aisle and faced them. For 3 decades, I had feared these people. I had let their memories shape far too many quiet moments. But standing there, seeing them small and cornered, I realized I wasn't looking at threats. I was looking at individuals who had lived off others. You sold me, I said, not raising my voice. I spoke the way I speak when giving a formal judgment, calm and final. You didn't just leave me at an airport. You profited from it. You placed a value on your daughter and spent it on gambling. Karen tried to respond, tears streaming, repeating the same explanations she had used for years. Samantha, please. We were young. We were scared. We did love you. You declared me dead, I said, cutting in. You signed a statement saying I no longer existed so you could finance your lifestyle. The daughter you had ended that day in Terminal 3. I leaned closer, letting the quiet settle. This was the controlled silence I had learned to use, not the silence that once overwhelmed me. A person legally declared deceased cannot inherit, Kevin, but someone you presumed gone can still hold you accountable, and I will use every legal tool available until you regret coming back into my life. The judge struck her gavel. Case dismissed with prejudice. Bailiff, take the plaintiffs into custody. This matter is being referred to the district attorney for immediate review of potential insurance fraud and perjury. Kevin and Karen began shouting as officers approached, but I didn't watch. I turned away as they once turned away from me. The consequences unfolded quickly. The statute of limitations on the 1995 fraud was complicated, but the perjury they committed in court was current. They were indicted 3 weeks later. Local news, which had previously focused on the inheritance, shifted to a new headline: Parents who exploited their child. Their reputation dissolved. Their church withdrew support. Neighbors who had offered help for decades demanded answers they couldn't provide. Legal fees consumed everything. They lost their home and ended with no resources, no status, and no daughters. I didn't keep the $5.5 million. William had not left it to me for luxury. He had left it as a foundation. I used it to establish the Baggage Claim Foundation, offering strong legal support for foster youth aging out of the system, ensuring someone is there when formal structures stop providing support. We work to ensure no child stands alone, wondering if they matter. 6 months later, I sat in a Chicago cafe across from Megan, who was laughing at something I said. She looked different, less burdened. She had left her agency job and joined the foundation as our lead social worker. We were building a new relationship, steadily and without the weight of our parents' story between us. As I reached for my coffee, the sleeve of my coat moved, showing the red wool scarf around my neck. I wasn't wearing it for warmth. I wore it because I liked it. It wasn't protection anymore. It was simply a scarf. The cafe was loud with voices and dishes, but for a moment I listened to the quiet underneath it. It wasn't the isolating silence of the airport. It was the quiet of something resolved, a case closed, a debt settled. I looked at Megan, at the work we were creating, and I understood what William had seen all along. I wasn't the child abandoned. I was the child who was found.